Everyone, and welcome to our Sunday service here at Ananda. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Nayaswami Jayanti, and this is Nayaswami Babani, and it is our great joy to share Sunday service with you. I always feel blessed when I get this particular topic. Perfection is self-transcendence. What does that mean? Perfection is something to contemplate. And it's interesting, when I was growing up in the Methodist Church, I don't recall that this particular passage was mentioned very often. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. I'm sure it must have been mentioned at some point, but it certainly wasn't dwelt upon. But it's important to understand the sequence in time in which Jesus was talking about this. He had already been dealing with the multitudes and many, many people coming to him for healing and people wanting to touch his feet and people crowding around him. But when it came time that he wanted to speak directly to his direct disciples, he retired from the multitudes and went up in the mountains, and his disciples joined him there. And it isn't that he didn't want the people in the multitudes to hear his word. It isn't that he loved them any less. But he knew that to them that have ears, let them hear. And if they didn't have enough spiritual realization to really receive what it was he wanted to give to his direct disciples, it would have been lost on them. Elsewhere in the Bible, he said, don't cast your pearls before swine. Well, he wasn't calling the people swine, but the point is that, you can't take your treasures and throw them in front of something that isn't going to appreciate them. So when he wanted to talk directly with his disciples, he went up into the mountains and they joined him there. And that was when he gave them the Sermon on the Mount, where he talked about the Beatitudes, which essentially are the attitudes that a disciple must have. They are requisite for spiritual growth and advancement. And it wasn't until the end of that chapter, after giving them all of the Beatitudes, that he said, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now, it's important to know that he was saying that perfection not only is possible, but it was a commandment. It wasn't, well, gee, it would be nice if someday you might want to think about, perhaps striving for perfection, and, some people get there. And no, he was adamant, be ye therefore perfect. It was a commandment to the disciples that they pursue perfection. And obviously not many in the multitudes were ready to hear that because it's not an easy task. The path to liberation is not for weaklings. It's not for those who are not committed. Their time will come. They will have an incarnation when they are ready and they are committed, and then it will have meaning to them and they will have what it takes at that time to get there. But the spiritual life, when you dedicate your life entirely to God and to nothing else, that you really want perfection, you want liberation, you want cosmic consciousness, it takes every ounce of strength you have to stay committed in the face of all the trials that get thrown at you. Satan tries hard to stop you. Anybody ever experienced that? I think probably we all have. It's interesting that Swami Kriyananda explains in Promise of Immortality that in just a few simple words, Jesus is explaining the essence of his teachings. 1, seek perfection in God. Live consciously in his love. Visualize his presence in all, not just all people, but all creatures, all life. Share with them the love we receive inwardly from him, a love that by nature has to be impersonal, as God loves us impersonally. Thus alone, with His grace, can we achieve all that we ever sought in life. Personal effort can invite grace, but it cannot replace the need for it. So it is important that we strive and do our very best to incorporate the attitudes of the Beatitudes, to see God in everyone, not only because that's the reality, but because by loving everyone, by seeing God in everyone, it's easier to love everyone, because then it's not just, oh, Joe Blow, or, Susie Smart, or whoever, or that guy that cut in front of me on the freeway. Fill in the blanks. We all have those occurrences. But if you can step back and see that God is in everyone, that we are all children of God, if we, I include myself, can learn to do that, to the degree that we see God in everyone, then it's easier to love everyone, and to love everyone with God's love, not our own love. Can we love on our own? No. We can't love without God, because God is love, and that's where we learn love. So there are some steps that we can take to get to perfection. And Swami sort of lays it out in Promise of Immortality, which, by the way, if you care to read it, there's copies in the boutique. He takes that he has given us in Rays of the One Light, which we read from every Sunday, and he has expanded it. And he made it all the way through the first half of the year. He didn't finish the second half of the year. I think he left that for someone else to do. Anyway, he says, number 1, inner communion. That's the way to know God. And what is inner communion but meditation? And it's interesting, Master says, and I don't recall, somebody might be able to tell me, but I have read that Master said, it's important that you practice the techniques, meaning meditation techniques, not only because they work, but even more importantly, he said, because it is through the techniques that I can help you. So by putting the effort out to practice the techniques, we attract the Guru's grace, and through the Guru's grace, he can help us grow spiritually. Love all equally as children of God. It is only from God that the ability comes to love others purely. Attunement with Him brings realization of the oneness of all life. So, meditation, love all equally, attunement with God. And the beauty of this teaching is that it encourages us to view divine consciousness as our fundamental reality and ultimate destiny. So perfection is our reality. How did Master put it? Self-realization is knowing in all parts of body, mind, and soul that we are right now in possession of the kingdom of God, that we don't have to pray that it comes to us. It's ours already. We just have to improve our knowing. So perfection is our divine birthright. Keep your mind and heart focused on the goal and persevere to the end. Or, as the affirmation today, have courage. There's a story that's told about Arjuna when he was studying under, I think it was Drupada. Correct me, somebody, if you know them. I think it was Drupada, who was teaching not only Arjuna, but several of his colleagues. Drona. Yes, thank you. He was teaching them the art of archery. And so he would call the students up one at a time, and he would say, there's a bird up there in that tree. I want you to see if you can hit the bird. And so one at a time, the students would come up, and he would say, what do you see? And first one said, oh, I see the blue sky, I see the clouds, I see the tree, but I see, and he mentioned all these other things. And he said, go ahead, shoot. And he missed. So one at a time, the other students came up, and it was a similar story. They saw lots of things. They saw the bird, but it wasn't until Arjuna came up, and Drona said to him, Arjuna, what do you see? He said, the head of the bird. Do you see anything else? Nope, the head of the bird. And he said, let your arrow fly. And of course he hit the target. That's the way we have to be with our focus on the divine search, with our love for God. It has to be our constant, God has to be our constant companion. Not just in meditation, not just when we're here at church, not just when we're doing kind things to others, but every day, all day long. We need to be so in love with God that we share everything with Him. You know, when you fall in love in a human sense, you want to share everything with your loved one, the beloved, right? You just can't wait to see him, to tell him, what a wonderful day and all these things that happen. Well, we have to be that way, only much deeper with God, and share everything, our troubles, everything. Master Yogananda said that God doesn't mind your mistakes. He minds your indifference. He knows we make mistakes. He created this world, right? I mean, He set it up from the beginning. It really is kind of a trap. The delusion that we have to endure and learn to be non-attached and get to that point where it has absolutely no impact on us. It's interesting in the Bible that Jesus defines virtue as that which deepens our attunement with God. So how does the devotee, the disciple, develop the kind of attunement that draws grace to achieve perfection? Well, we have lots of examples, fortunately, on our spiritual path that we can look to. Some of them are direct disciples of Yogananda. Sister Gyanamata is an excellent example, and if you have not read her book, I highly recommend it, and read it more than once. But Sister Gyanamata would never sit in Yogananda's presence. She had such respect for the Guru that she would never sit in his presence. She always preferred to stand. And she said, "Change no circumstance of my life, Lord. Change me. And what happens to you in this life does not matter. What matters is what you become in the process." So when things happen to us and we think, why me? Why me, Lord? Just like when I had trouble with my fingers, I have to chuckle. Divine Mother likes to play with me because it keeps me humble. I could play that chant flawlessly all day at home and never miss a note. But that's okay. I understand the importance of humility. Rajarshi Janakananda is another wonderful example of attunement. He took seclusion regularly. Even when he had the opportunity to be on the West Coast and be close to Master, he spent long hours in seclusion. He was a very successful businessman. He was a multimillionaire in his day, and he owned insurance and oil and railroads and all kinds of things, and he was on the board of, I'm sure, many, many organizations. And yet, he would spend 6 hours every day meditating before he went to the office. Many people didn't know where he was and what he was doing. All they know is that he didn't come in till noon. And when someone would find out what he had been doing, well, how can you afford to do that? His answer was, I can't afford not to do that. He has to have that foundation. He has to be grounded in his relationship with God. He has to feel the Guru's presence working through him, or he can't serve in that way. And because of that attunement with Master, he was extremely successful and Master relied on him, and the money that he made, much of SRF was developed with the money that Rajarshi Janakananda provided. That was his service. And I'm sure that was a relationship that they had had many times before, but in this lifetime, when they were coming back, I'm sure that Master told them, well, you're going to be the source of what helps the organization, so I need you to do that. Swami Kriyananda, another excellent example of attunement. He never wanted to be a guru. He never wanted to be up on a pedestal. In the early years, he would scold us horrendously if he thought we had his picture on the altar. He said, no, I'm not a guru, I don't belong there, don't put my picture there. And yet, he had perfect attunement. Yogananda told him when he passed from this incarnation, he would have moksha. He would have final liberation. That's a pretty amazing promise. And Swami Kriyananda taught us that joy is the solution, it's not the goal. So perfect attunement means being joyful, being a channel for that joy and that love and that blessing to everyone that you meet. Some of our fellow Guru Bhais, and you can tell which ones they are that have attunement. You can see it in their eyes. You can feel it in their hearts. And you can see it in the lives that they live. And I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of them. So even Paul of Tarsus, going back to the Bible now, who became St. Paul, he became a disciple of Christ after Christ was resurrected, so he never knew him personally in the body. And yet, what attunement he had. And I'm sure you probably know the story on the road to Damascus. He had been someone who was persecuting the Christians. He was the cause of many of them going to their death. And Christ appeared to him and said, "What are you doing to my people?" Well, in that vision, he was completely changed. But for the rest of his life, his attunement was so intense that he never lost sight of it. Even Judas Iscariot, we tend to think of him as the real bad guy in world religion and history of Christianity. But he was one of the 12. He couldn't have been one of the 12 disciples if he didn't have incredibly good karma. Yeah, he was attached to money, and he paid a price for that. But he's liberated now. Master said he saw him in this lifetime in Master's recent incarnation. And he was with another teacher in India, and Master told the teacher to liberate him. So if we really think that, we're falling behind and we're real laggards, take heart. If Judas can do it, we can do it. And then I wanted to share just briefly about a book that's in the boutique that some of you I know have read, and those of you who have not, I highly encourage you to, and it's called My Heart Remembers Swami Kriyananda. How many people have read that book? Great. The rest of you are in for a real delight. Narayani was a Spanish girl, is a Spanish girl, I should say. She's still alive. She met Swami Kriyananda when she was 24 years old. Her father was a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda through SRF, but he went to Ananda Assisi, and that was his first exposure to Ananda. He had given his daughter Narayani a copy of the AY, which she read, devoured. And then after he had been to Assisi, he encouraged her to go, because he said, it's wonderful, I think you'll like it, I think you should go and experience this, which she did. Now on her first visit, Swami wasn't there, she hadn't met him yet, but she went to a concert of his music. And the music so changed her consciousness that when the concert was over, she couldn't even rise to her feet. All she could do was sit in perfect stillness and just absorb the energy of what he had experienced. In later years, she would tell people that when they asked her, when did you meet Swami Kriyananda? At first, she had started telling people, well, it was in 2003, but actually this visit to Assisi was before that. And she said, I met him when I heard his music. And he himself would say, if you want to know me, get to know my music. Because the music was a gift to him from God. It isn't like he sat down at the piano and, tortured his way through writing this music. He would sit down at the piano after meditating and say, okay, Divine Mother, I need a song that expresses fill in the blank, whatever it was he was looking for. And he would be given the music. Like his oratorio, Christ Lives, came to him. He went to the Holy Land and he visited all the holy places, the Sea of Galilee and all of the holy places, Bethlehem. He went to all of those places and meditated very deeply there until he could feel the consciousness of Jesus and his disciples and the time. And then after the trip to the Holy Land, he went back to Assisi and went into seclusion. And over the course of the next 3 weeks, he was given essentially the entire oratorio, which is, I think, totals now 48 pieces of music. Some of them are solos, but 12 of them, in fact, are choir songs. And if you haven't heard it before, I highly recommend that you get the CD and listen to it, because it's very, very powerful. Very powerful. So he said, if you want to get to know me, get to know my music, because it was the consciousness he was in, that state of consciousness when God gave him the music, and it is imprinted, if you will, vibrationally in the music. And it's very, very powerful. So when Narayani did meet Swami Kriyananda, she was very, very touched. And obviously they've been together many lifetimes. What came to her mind as she was in front of him was, my king. Now later in the relationship, as she got to know Swami, Swami told her he felt when he was King Alfonso in Spain, Master was King Ferdinand in Spain. Master said he was a king in Spain who drove the Moors out of Spain. Swami was his son, King Alfonso. And he said to Narayani he thinks she was his daughter in that lifetime. And that's why there was such, and her thought, my king. I mean, she was recalling something other than this life. But what she did to develop attunement, now this was a girl who spoke Spanish only. She didn't speak Italian. She didn't speak English. She didn't speak any of the languages that Swami spoke. But she would listen to his music, and she said she listened to his talks, all of them, anything she could get her hands on that was his. And it was the power of his consciousness. She said, I got the message. Even though I didn't understand the words, it was the consciousness. And that's what changed me. And that from that point on, her attunement with him was just exceptional. Now later, she was actually with Swami about the last 10 years of his life. As his personal attendant, the last 7, 8 years of his life. She was with him all the time. And she would strive to have such attunement that she said she would watch him very carefully, watch his facial expressions, not only listen to what he said to people, but watch how he reacted until she could feel those subtle shifts of consciousness in him. She got to the point where she didn't even have to, when he wanted to go more inward towards the end, when he wanted to be in silence more, she took care of all of his outer responsibilities. She would respond to invitations for him to speak. She knew which ones to accept, which ones not to accept, based on her attunement. And I mention that because she's fairly new to the path. But in spite of that, she's not new to the path. She's an old, old soul. But it's a wonderful example of if one puts their heart and soul into developing that kind of attunement, that is the kind of attunement that draws the grace to set us free. And we all have the ability to do that. Not only do we have it, but it's what we must do, is get to the point where our attunement with God and Guru is so powerful that nothing in this world can touch us. Yogananda said, "A saint is a sinner who never gave up." And that's important for us to remember, because it is a near Herculean task to find liberation. It isn't something that comes easily. It is something we have to work for. And we have to work for it because it's in the effort that we draw the grace to achieve it. But he also said, remember, God loves you just as much as he loves the saints. He is the nearest of the near and the dearest of the dear. And if we hold him in our hearts that way and talk to him nonstop, we can develop the kind of attunement that will bring us to cosmic consciousness. Although the task is more than Herculean, Swami says, it is one that showers treasures untold on all who sincerely attempt it. The sweetness of pure love, expanding happiness, deep inner peace, ever-growing wisdom, a soaring sense of freedom, and the awareness of divine support through every trial in life. Do other ways of life offer anything comparable? God bless you all.